the structure of personality. When I talk about personality, is now what makes us, and we have different temperaments, we have different personality types. So when you talk about the structure, what I mean is what makes you a person, what makes you who you are. Freud was able to really delve deeper and bring this out in very simple terms. Now, there are things that we are born with. They are biological in us, like our genetic makeup. You're tall, you're short, you're black, you're white. That is your identity. The blood that runs through your vein comes from a family tree. So that is what we call the id. And if you want to put it like ID, it's your identity. All right. Now, there's something called the ego. The ego is the reality principle in a human being. It deals with realistic stuff. All right. Now, when you talk about reality, it is that component that addresses things. Now, when I talked about id is based on pleasure principle. It is so selfish. It is like when a child is crying, they want immediate attention. It is either when they're crying, they need to be changed their diaper, they need food, or either they are too cold or hot. So they are crying and they expect you to quickly respond to that cry. If you don't, they will continue crying. That is the ID at work. And it is purely derived out, or motivated by pleasure, self-pleasure. Like, do this now, I want this now. But unlike the ID, the ego is so realistic. It's able to tell you that if you jump from that tree, you're going to fall. That is the ego at work, all right? If I would just bring it closer home to this topic on human sexuality. Now, for those of us who are very lustful, most of the time we say that your ego is not at work. Your ego is controlling you, because the realistic part of the situation at hand is you're lustful and you do not even know who you're going to engage sex with. You'll go out there, pick a whore or whatever, okay? You have left your wife at home. It's because at that point in time, either you have taken too much alcohol and you just feel you need to satisfy yourself. So this is the id, now asking for sexual pleasure. But the ego kicks in and says, there are two things. Number one, you'll have this sex, but remember, it's either you're going to get an infection, okay? You're going to sire a child, without knowing, because, you're just delving into this act. You have not really sat down and weighed the option. So what happens is the ego now speaks to you and tells you, you have two choices. These are the choices that you have. And it will have a consequence, all right? So it gives you now the realism of the picture. You'll have HIV, you may, end up being a father too soon and all that. But if your id is stronger than the ego, then you will be drawn more to pleasure and move away from the reality of things. Another good example is for those people who are lazy. You're so lazy. So you will sleep for 20 hours out of 24 hours, okay? Why? You just feel lazy. Your body is just telling you, let's just sleep, just sleep. After all, we always have excuses. You're tired, you deserve this, okay? Now, if your ego is at work, it will tell you, the more you slumber, the more you wait for poverty to attack you. So it will try and reason out with you, all right? And if the id takes over, then you end up being a victim of your own habits. But if the ego is at work, it will look at everything realistic. And the third component is the superego. The superego is the moral branch of your personality structure. It is the one that tells you this is right, this is wrong. And it takes in the realism of the ego and now categorizes it, and says, okay, fine, this is the realistic thing. Like for the example that I've used, you've picked up someone from the street and you're just about to involve yourself in this pleasurable act, without knowing this person, without considering what the consequences will look like. So the superego now checks in and tells you quite a number of things. It reminds you quite a number of things. First of all, you're sinning. So spiritually, it will also remind you you're sinning. This is sin. God forbids it. Number two, it will remind you you have a wife at home. Okay? Number three, it might even tell you, and you're high on drugs or alcohol. Number four, it will tell you, by the way, be ready for what awaits you. So the kind of punishment that is going to come. So the superego is a superior branch of the ego. Remember, the ego, it will just bring the realistic stuff, but now the super ego will categorize that and say this is right and this is wrong. And based on now these things that I've reminded you about, the structure of the mind and also the structure of the personality, if you really have been listening through this presentation, you will realize the organs of pleasure in our childhood are copy paste what gives us pleasure as adults. All right, it is what gives us pleasure as adults. All right, the second thing, and even before I move to the second thing, what I'd like to emphasize is, for us to also have ultimate pleasure, we have to have childlike mindsets. We have to have childlike mindsets. And in so many ways, I'm reminded, when Jesus was talking about us being like children, I really now relate, because Jesus used to speak, he used a lot of parables. So when he talks about children, I kind of like relate when it comes to human sexuality. Unless you're willing to loosen up and enjoy the moment and not judge, because children are so innocent, they rarely get annoyed at their parents for beating them or their friends. They forgive so easily. So you find that a lot of the time why we are not able to enjoy sexuality within a relationship is because we are holding so much pain and resentment towards the other person. So even at the point of touch, it makes us even get angry. So for us to really enjoy these organs and enjoy one another, we need to really have that childlike mindset. And the second thing is, without regulation, remember we talked about regulation, some people giving too much, some retaining. Without the healthy regulation, you end up becoming dysfunctional. It is the reason why some of us end up having bulimia, anorexia, some certain conditions or dysfunctionalities in life, because they stem back into our childhood. All right, so it is so critical that we assess ourselves. Where are we not regulating very well? And then that can give us an idea of what we need to deal with. All right, now allow me to take you into about 6 defense mechanisms that will arise in, when it comes to, I try to pick things that I feel are attached to human sexuality, and maybe just, explain how they function. All right. Now, part of the things that we do as human beings is blocking. Okay. And I will be reading from my notes because, as I said, I'm not a genius. I love to refer. So blocking is because of the unpleasant memories that are emerging in the middle of a conversation. So what happens is, you can be talking to someone, all right? And what happens is your mind, you remember I talked about the unconscious, subconscious, and the mind is trying to remind you of an experience that you had in your childhood. So you're talking, but your mind, you're in a place where there's a trigger. So you're absolutely engaging in a different convo. But the mind now is already triggered, and it's trying to remind you of something that stems back into your childhood. And what happens is you try to block that, but still continue having a conversation. So what happens is you lose your trail of thoughts. Okay? Just by that act of blocking, you lose your trail of thoughts. And that happens to us a lot of time. We get distorted, we get this, interrupted by so much, and this can be a very annoying habit when it happens behind the 4 closed walls of a bedroom, So we need to also try and see how, out of these things that I mentioned, which one really affects you a lot of the time. The second thing is denial. Denial is accessing thoughts and feelings, wishes and motives that we react to indifferently. Eventually, we look like we are dysfunctional. It is very easy. Sometimes we fall in love with people. Maybe you're in a marriage setup and there's someone else that you seem to be getting interested in, and maybe prayers are not working for you. So these feelings keep on affecting you. Now, what happens with some of us, instead of going and seeking help on how to undo this, we end up now having very negative attitudes towards these people. You look at a girl maybe they've fallen in love with a young man, and they end up now being very resentful and angry. Anytime they're talking to this guy, they're so angry for no reason. That is what we call living in denial, whereby you don't want to address the feelings. I'm attracted to this person. So you end up now hiding it so that it doesn't look like what it is. Yeah, I had to grab my cup of tea. I can see that this is gonna take a bit of time, but stay on because I'm going to give you recommendations or interventions that you need, to take in case you have any sexual dysfunctions, or in case, you feel that you're at that place where you are not happy with your sexual life. And this, of course, as I said, this is not for children. This is basically for adults, and it is meant to, make your relationships thrive. The third point, when it comes to defense mechanisms that we get, it also brings in the idea of, rationalizing, where we tend to take things and just, because of how we are so distorted, we input our bad attitudes, our belief systems, and then we back it up with a reasoning that is not ideally the right one. And we do this for many many reasons. And this is something that also, if you check out my video on narcissism, narcissists really like to use, they take up anything and just, put stuff and, just make things work for them. So rationalization is also common in a lot of people, and it's a defense mechanism that is ideally meant to get us out of those ugly situations that we don't want to be caught up in. The fourth one is by saying regression. What I mean is, the current situation that you are in takes you back to a previous stage of maturity. A good example, is maybe a child who has been, alone, maybe the firstborn in a family, and then shortly after, they realize that their mother is pregnant and they're getting another child. So what happens is this child, as a defense mechanism, they go back into a stage like bedwetting as soon as the other sibling is born. And I feel that, even when we encounter traumas, it is also a very good trigger to this. There are children who go through serious trauma, and if you ever find your child beginning to bedwet, and they're older, dig deeper. There could be a lot of things happening, in their mind. So you need, to try and talk them out and get to know what the problem is, and not be harsh, because a lot of us, especially African, parents, we are very big on, reprimanding our children without really, really fast trying to understand them. So even in mature people, what happens is sometimes, you get angry at someone, and what do? You become a child, and because you want their attention, you just keep quiet. Silent treatment, I think, is one of the components of regression. I stand to be corrected on this, but I know a lot of us adults regress into a place of immaturity, because ideally we should not handle our spouses by punishing them with silent treatment. I have done silent, I've practiced silent treatment in my younger years, and sometimes I do it, for many many reasons. And many reasons is not that I'm rationalizing, but we are human. As I said, we're never 100%. But if you feel that that is what works, go ahead and use it. But just don't make it a habit, because then if it becomes your tool of manipulation, then what you're doing is draining the relationship. A good relationship is said to have intimacy, and as I said earlier, regularly. So when you bring in this regression where you go into a level of immaturity, it also sort of puts out the other person, because they're struggling to imagine, who am I dealing with? Am I dealing with a child? Am I dealing with an adolescent? Am I dealing with, because some of these behaviors can really, really be demotivating to your partner. So it's very important that we try not to regress. And also, as I'm speaking, I hope that most of you are assessing themselves and just trying to see where you sort of like have issues. All right. So if you're journeying on with me and you're picking up some things in yourself, in your spouse, hold on to that thought. We will address these issues as we end the session. All right. So there's something called repression, and repression is, so remember there's regression and there's now repression. It is banishing unacceptable feelings from coming to our awareness. Okay? Now, there's what, as I said, the ego brings out as reality. Now, repression is when you refuse to deal with those things, the realism. So what you do is you put a block and just say, I don't want to think about it. But ideally, there's some feelings that are breeding inside you. Now, if I can give a very good example, is when you become bitter for God letting you go through a divorce. Yet maybe you're a Christian, or yet you believe that that relationship that you had with that person was meant to be there for eternity until death do you part. When we talk about repression, it's just pressing down a certain feeling, but then now out of that repression, as a negative feeling is bred. And anything that is, I always say this, anything that you try and contain within you will either eat you up or destroy you. That's why we have a lot of people suffering from chronic ulcers. Why? They've been going through a lot of stress, but since they don't have a healthy way of letting these things out, the stress, the gas that is produced when you're stressed, that's eating up your own flesh. And that's how we end up with bleeding ulcers, because the more we continue suppressing these feelings, the more we are rotting inside. So I would not really advocate for any of these negative defense mechanism. The best thing is when you seek help from a therapist, from an expert who is able to help you deal with things realistically. Remember, the ego is always functional. And if you embrace it and you embrace the super ego and try and do away with the id unless necessary, you should be able to function very well. Now, withdrawal is the other thing that I felt that I should talk about, because it affects relationships in so many ways. So withdrawal is basically, as the word says, you just run away from the situations. These are the things that we are seeing in families today. Men abandoning their families, they are running away with younger women, men abandoning their roles. They don't want to provide, just because you're dating a woman who has a good salary, you then feel that you don't need to contribute anything in that house since she is able. As long as you're abandoning your role as a man, I want to start by addressing this spiritually. You are answerable to God. The Bible says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Christ died for the church. That is how deep he loved the church. Now, if that is what God has set as a standard for you as a man, who are you to come up with rationalization where you justify your reason? You are not providing because your wife earns twice what you earn. What excuse do you have for abandoning your children and going to sire others? Guys, I'm not God, but I know the word of God. We all have to be accountable for our actions. So withdrawing is something that I have seen being brought to the counseling room, where young men of nowadays, this husband of nowadays, sorry, I don't mean to be harsh, but I just feel that there's this other way that we have brought up our children, that they literally have very serious defense mechanism, very negative defense mechanism. And it is the reason why we have so many divorce cases happening, because people don't just care. It is about, I am walking away and I'm not turning back. It is not about what does God want me to do, what are God's expectations. How do I love this wife? How do I love this husband? All right. So that is the reason why we are having a lot of dysfunctionality today, in the society. And maybe I can just take us now into the biological components of how our bodies function. And with this, I just want to, bring into your realization, how chemicals and hormones affect our human sexuality. I will start by addressing the female and the kind of hormone that supports any female. I will move on to the male, and then I'll bring in the chemicals that now support these hormones to be able to function in the body, to be able to regulate and all that. Now, any female has two major supportive hormones, the estrogen and the progesterone. Okay, those two help them in terms of maintaining their uterus, their moods, because estrogen has to do a lot with moods. It works with a chemical in the brain called serotonin that regulates our moods. You know, the estrogen does works on the mood, the memory. It supports and maintains a serotonin and another chemical called dopamine. The progesterone aids relaxation and sleep, and it also supports the estrogen and the uterine health. All right. Now, when it comes to the men major hormone is the testosterone. It regulates the sex drive in men. And that's why we have this thing. Sorry, I need to mention this, but please, men, don't hate on me. You know, we always say when, you know, blood goes into the brain, then, you know, down there nothing is functioning. But when blood goes down, you know, to that organ, you know, the penis, then, you know, up here nothing is functional. So that is normally the that is normally the theory. When it's important for me to mention that hormones, the word hormones is derived from a Greek word called homo, which means to set in motion. And when we talk about setting in motion biologically, what do we mean? What we mean is these hormones stimulate, they regulate, and they control the functions of the tissues. So they stimulate, regulate, and control the functions of this. So that shows you that that stimulation is where our topic of today, you know, basically and ideally falls in, because sexuality is about stimulation. It's about, you know, libido. It's about, you know, sexual reproduction. It's about all these things. Okay, so some of these other functions that are there is metabolism, and of course when you talk about, you know, controlling functions of tissues, it has to do with immune functions. Now, what do chemicals do, and how are chemicals transmitted in the body? The chemicals are transmitted through a very interesting process called neurotransmission, and it is the chemicals normally pass through the nerves, all right? And that is why, you know, when you're functioning well, your nerves respond to the feeling of touch. If you're in a relationship and when you're touched, you're just hard-hearted, no response, you need an intervention, because ideally the way God has created us, there are certain places which are more sensitive than others, you know. So when you're touched there, ideally you should respond, you should want the other person, all right? You should be aroused, you should be stimulated. But if that is not happening, you need to see, you know, a doctor, you know, someone who specializes in, you know, nerves, and they should be able to help you either by giving you you know, nerve supplements or something like that. All right. Now, chemicals are divided into two. The first one is the ones that stimulate, and the second one is the one that calms. So it's an opposite, like, you know, end to end. So the ones that stimulate are just like that stimulation. I mean, they're called excitatory chemicals, and the ones that calm are called inhibitory, because they sort of like inhibit. You know, they make you slow down, and, you know, they calm you in so many ways. So I'm going to be talking about maybe the two very important chemicals that support sexuality, and the first one is dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for our behavior, for our awareness, and our mood. And it is, in human science, we call it the motivational hormone. It is the one that is associated with pleasure and reward. It is the one that rewards us. There's a feeling it gives us, you know, when we do something. That is the dopamine, all right? And something very interesting is any drug or alcohol targets this hormone, this chemical, all right? That is why when most of us, you know, take you know, these drugs, we get that feeling of high, and we don't tend to forget that. So we're always wanting that kind of pleasure. We want to be rewarded every other time, and that, of course, in itself leads us to addiction. All right. Then the second one is the serotonin. Its main function is appetite and digestion, arousal, and also mood. So you see that both chemicals have something to do with our mood and arousal. all right? And this serotonin, interestingly, it's stored in the intestines. That's why sometimes when we are anxious, we feel it in our stomachs, we diarrhea. Why? There's a chemical that actually operates there, all right? And this I need to say, for all of us who abuse antidepressant tablets, anti-anxiety tablets, this is the chemical that is targeted by drugs. So we are either when we are taking, when we're ingesting, the drugs, and we are taking, medication, they go and sort of like overload the system, because most of the time we feel now we are lacking. So I hope we are able to understand why we either are in high moods, or we are either going through a depression. These chemicals, together with the hormones that I've mentioned, normally work hand in hand. I love this, analogy of depression or excitement that is brought about by the hormones and the chemicals in our bodies. Similarly, when a relationship is not regulated, when there's an issue in terms of balance, where the equation of God, as I said earlier, is 1 + 1 = 1. A man leaves the parents, you gets reunited to his wife, and they become one, and God helps them thrive through the relationship. So if that equation is not like that, and everyone is operating, doing things the way they want, and trying to manipulate, the other person, then that relationship, just like the way physiologically our bodies are thrown off and we start having issues, personality disorders, mood disorders, and all that, the same thing happens in the relationship. And let me then just say that it is because of suppression of feelings, suppression of hormones, suppressions of chemicals, suppression of our childhood memories, that we get depressed. Therefore, I would like to just bring this in. Depression in relationship is brought by lack of a spiritual understanding of God's mind when it comes to our sexuality. If you go back at the beginning, I've really explained how the Bible brings out God's heart and mind when it comes to, our sexuality. God actually would desire that not only do we have intimacy with Him, and intimacy is about prayer, meditation, and just focusing on God. That is what intimacy is. But when it comes to relationship, intimacy now goes physical. Of course, there's the emotional bit, but physically, that is where now the sexual bit comes in. Okay, and then another reason that brings about depression when it comes to relationships, because of underdeveloped mindsets, immature minds. You remember when I talked about regression, going back to immature state, it's the same thing. When one person behaves like a child because of their selfishness, because they are being controlled by dopamine, because they are being controlled by their pleasure, their selfishness, it really throws off the relationship to a place of imbalance. So if one of you is immature, it becomes very difficult for that relationship to thrive. Now, the other thing of that causes depression is because of a dysfunctional brain and body. And we have talked about the two chemicals that the brain produces that support our sexuality. So if the dopamine and the serotonin are in lack, and then you come to now the hormones themselves, either a man does not have enough testosterone or the woman does not have enough estrogen, the process of just that whole sexual stuff is not possible. Because then you'll have someone who's going through moods, they're not getting aroused, all these things. And these are very important. When you behave like a stone, it becomes very hard for the other person to even warm up to you in the future, because they're like, is it me? Is it so if you notice that some of these things that I'm talking about are part of your trends, it's really time to change. And change happens the moment you want it. You must want it so badly that it actually pushes you to become a different person. And marriage is not about changing your partner. Marriage is not about manipulating your spouse. Marriage is about changing you first, so that the change that you go through motivates the other person to change. I always say that when we meet our spouses, they're already grown, they already have developed mindsets, they already have their chemicals, operating in the system, they've already experienced childhood. What makes you think by being harsh, by being manipulative, by going to a witch doctor, you're going to change them? Some of these things, yet you may see that they are effective, but remember, the only thing that is permanent is change. And the only one person who remains permanent in being that friend and having power to change people is God. So work on you and pray for the other person. Anything that you can't change, take it to God in prayer. When it comes to human sexuality, I can tell you what I'm presenting is 10%. Hopefully in the future, I'll upload, more material to help you understand. If you're a psychological student, this I'm sure will help you a lot in understanding the psychoanalytic theory. If you're in a relationship, as I said earlier, if you're single and you're just, working towards making that relationship work, or just investing in yourself so that when you meet this person, you're able to know, they're able to find you stable and mature and knowledgeable, this is your thing. So at the end of the day, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe, just support mental wellness, mental awareness, by subscribing, share to your friends if this content is is really helpful to you. Now, this is the juiciest part, and maybe this is what most of us are looking for. What then do we do? Should we be these victims of, our childhood experiences, probably sexual dysfunctionality, or, we just feel that our relationships are not working and we are not happy? Now, I'll just point out four things that might be useful to you, and then just give other recommendations. Yeah, the first thing is you have to eat your spiritual food. Eat your spiritual food. Know the Bible, know God's expectation about you, know why God created you, know the small things that influence what we see out of you, because knowledge is power, and there's nothing as powerful as the spiritual element. So work on your spirituality, invest in meditation. These things, the Bible has solutions to everything. We learn a lot when we read about experiences of men of God. So this is very, very critical. When you understand God's heart, mind regarding your life, you're able to know how to deal with issues in life. You're able to even consult the word of God, when it comes to certain issues. The second thing is seek therapeutic and professional services. Now, for this specific topic, since it touches on human sexuality, there's something that I cannot do for you as a counselor, as a psychologist, but a sexual therapist can help you. When it comes to lack therein of hormones and indeficiencies, then at least a therapist, someone who's trained, to just help people attain, that orgasm, attain that, that kind of life that they, want to always have, then they are the right person. But if it comes to things like childhood experiences that have made you have a distorted personality, there I can help you. Guys, never ever get ashamed of getting counseling services, and especially for the men, because there's that shame that I find men having of not coming for counseling because they feel it is a sign of weakness. People who seek counseling services are actually the strongest when it comes to mindsets. What you only need in life is knowing this thing or this situation that is becoming a barrier between you and success. And once you identify it, work with someone who has the ability to help you. All right? Now, we've talked about hormones, the chemicals. Of course, these things don't just manufacture themselves. They are supported by the food we eat. So if you're experiencing hormonal imbalances, chemical imbalances, you might need to see a nutritionist, or also seek the services of a doctor, because then in hospital they do tests, they're able to know which hormone is lacking, which hormone is not, so that one, it is something that you need to get medical intervention as well as nutrition. Sometimes some of these diets, what we eat actually influences how our bodies operate. Number 4 is just being intentional about sex, especially for those of us who are in marriages. In my younger years, I was very different. Now, almost in my mid 40s, my body is now beginning to give way to age. So, of course, there is no way I'll be somersaulting. So I always say enjoy your youth, enjoy your youth. But it doesn't mean that as you age, you make it an excuse for not enjoying life. We are told about Sarah, who enjoyed her sex at a later stage because she gave birth, when she was 90 plus. So ideally, we should we should make it an no we should make sex an intentional act, especially for those who are listening to me and they're past 35. Yeah, I know sometimes we get caught up in the issues of life. We are always trying to make ends meet. We are busy trying to provide for our children and all that. So sometimes we always put ourselves last. Remember, sex is like a drug, so it rewards you in one way or the other. So it's good for you to indulge and enjoy this thing, right? It's good for you to just indulge. And one thing that I tell couples is love is a commitment. It is not a feeling. As you age, and I say this out of experience, when I met my husband, he was so hard, he was handsome. He still is, but the feelings were there, deep feelings, because also you're young. As I said, remember, as you come out of adolescence, going into early, adulthood, all these ninis are over and above. Your dopamine levels are just peak, but as you age, things are different. So sometimes you actually need to remind yourself that, hey, am I, asking yourself those questions. Am I playing my role? Am I really, satisfying this other person? Okay. Remember, I always say, work on you, pray for the other person. You need to actually play your role. Don't keep on judging the other person while you are the one who is draining the relationship. So that is what I mean by love, commitment in love, and not making it affiliate. Today I don't feel like, you don't feel like, the other person feel like. So how will this thing work? Can one of you compromise? Can you commit to the process so that both of you don't end up suffering, right? So that is what I call commitment and intentionality. So if your sex life is boring and depressing, what do you need to? I'm sure some of you are asking, like this lady, she's talked for 1 hour plus. Can you just give us the solutions? My life is boring, I'm depressed, I no longer just feel my man, and all that. So this is for you. If you're bored, you're depressed, your sex life is dead, these are some of my recommendations. As I said, take what you want, leave what you don't feel you want to take and implement in your life. Number one, genuinely communicate your frustration to your partner. Don't assume that your partner is reading your mind. You're there giving silent treatment. Maybe it is because this person has not engaged you intimately for the last 2 weeks. So now your moods are everywhere and they're the wrong moods. Speak your mind. I just feel that we are not intimate. Can we work on our sex life? It's as simple as that, guys. A lot of us expect our men to read our minds. And please, if you're a woman and you're listening to me, men will never read your minds. And they refuse to read your minds. It's only a few percentage of them who will be very involved in trying to see where they have what they have done to hurt. Some of them will ask, but eventually they just move on. And that is how they are wired. So if you don't like to communicate, if you don't really, speak out your mind and say why you're frustrated, then don't make it look like this person is God and they're able to pick it up. All right? Communication is very, very key in any relationship. It makes things easier. It makes the yoke lighter. All right? When you do things in a negative way and you expect positive results, I think there your equation does not really add up, because what you give is what you get. So for you to be able to also, motivate the other person to have or, exhibit the same habit, you have to set pace. Don't always say you start. There's always that pointing finger. You start, then I will do it. No, start. And maybe this will be a motivator for your partner. The second thing is regularly set aside time for sex. And this, I'm talking to the older couples. Sometimes we are, as I said, we are caught up in issues of life and all that. So you can just quickly say, okay, in every week, Wednesday is going to be our day for sex. So that way, even for the women, it's easy for you to start adjusting your mind, okay? This may work for you, this may not work. There are people who love spontaneous sex, okay? But you know, if you're in that place whereby you feel you're in lack there of intimacy because you're caught up in lifestyle issues, then you need to basically set time for it so that you also don't get depressed because you're not getting these things. Your hormones are working, and you know. Number 3, begin to talk more openly and often about your sexual expectations. How well does your husband know you? Because some of the things that I've implemented with my husband is having a date night where we just sit and give each other feedback. Like, you know, we have sexual expectations which we were able to do at our earlier age, and we basically just discuss, you know, issues that surround us in terms of health, you know, sexual expectations, you know, finances and all that. And making this regular has really helped, you know, the marriage to stay alive. So it's also very important that you get to share your expectations to your partner so that they are able to meet those expectations. You know, there's some of us who wants to be pulled hair. You know, there's some of us who wants to just be stabbed. Sorry guys, I mean, I'm just joking, but you know, there are people who have very funny, you know, desires or fetishes. But when you're able to share with your partner, since they're the other person who, you know, completes you, at least they don't disappoint because you've already stated. So that this is actually part of communication. All right. Then change what you don't like in you when it comes to sexuality. You first change before you start telling the other person that, oh, I don't like it. You come to these rooms, you're moody. No, first change what you don't like in you, because you know things, those habits that are bad in you when it comes to sexuality. There's some people who just go into bed with very weird clothes and all that, and they still expect the other person to get, you know, excited about them. Sex is about setting the mood right. It's about having the right words. It's about those intimate times called for, you know, that intimate environment. It's like the way when you go to work, the environment shifts and, you know, you become very professional, very diplomatic. And when you go out to socialize, you know, to hang out with your friends, you also dress differently. You also, you know, you have a different attitude. So it is the same thing when it comes to intimacy and human sexuality. That right environment needs to be set. Okay, and then I'm very big on rules and norms and regulations. Okay, so since we are talking about human sexuality, it's very important that we practice hygiene. Okay, part of the rules and norms, this is also part of expectations. There are some of us who just go drinking, they come back, you know, they're smelling of alcohol, you've not showered, your breath is, I don't know, you know. So some of these things really turn on the other person. So hygiene is important. Why would you want to give, you know, someone the worst of you? You know, this is a gift. Sex is a gift from God. So whenever you're engaging, make sure that you are very clean. Give the other person at least an opportunity to enjoy. You can imagine when you're going to just kiss someone and they burp, and what they burp just makes you collapse. It is so bad. It is so bad. So we have to, and of course there's some of us who are very emotional. So you've not brushed your teeth, you've taken some toxic substances, and you're there trying to express yourself. Please shut up, go and brush your teeth. At least give the other person the best, because this is not something that we want to do every day, you know, or if you're doing it every day, at least it should be a time that someone can, you know, always have good memories of. The other thing that I'd recommend is keep on, you know, expanding your knowledge on this literature about human sexuality. Knowledge is power, and seeing that I'm giving this for free, if you're new again to this channel, please subscribe. I'm doing this for free, and I believe, you know, when I empower you, you're able to also have very stable relationships and all that. So if you can even share to your friends, you know, this presentation, it would really help. Okay. Then flexibility. We all have to be flexible in life. Remember when I talked about, you know, having a child mind-like? You have to be flexible. Don't just be too, you know, stiff. You're just there, you know, you don't want to open it. Yeah, you're just stiff. When it comes to relations, human relations, intimacy, you have to try and be a bit flexible. It's not that you're in school, it's not that you're, you know, in the army. This is, you know, something that is meant to reward your body. So be a bit flexible even as you enjoy the moment. Now, this is for the narcissists and other people who are suffering from personality dysfunction. Never ever use sex as a weapon of war. Never ever use sex as a weapon of war for manipulation. There's some relationships that have failed miserably because one partner has used this tool over and over again. And what happens is the other person just realizes this is frustrating and they end up going into infidelity. Are they justified? No. Remember the defense mechanism that I talked about, rationalization? People will come back into the session and they will tell me, I'm currently involved in another relationship because my husband uses sex to manipulate me. So when we are not talking, he will not have those intimate moments with me. Ideally, in a healthy relationship, you should be able to address each other's needs, away from the quarrels and everything. That is my own perception, right? But if you're that persistent or chronic narcissist that or manipulator, that just decides, okay, you will see who I am, you will, those kind of statements, then it is not the other person you're hurting. Ideally, it is you. You're hurting you. You're manipulating you, and eventually it is going to bring frustrations to you. Avoid criticism. This one I will not even, keep on talking, because I always say if you're pointing a finger, remember the thumb is actually addressing you. So before you point a finger, first make sure that you're perfect. And according to me, it's only God who is perfect. None of us is. So if you know you're imperfect, you will use the right tone, the right words, and the right timings. I always say if you learn to praise more, if you learn to compliment your partner more, even if they are not really delivering to your expectations, it will sort of like there's something that happens, when you praise someone, that person wants to please you more. So I would really urge anyone there who is listening to me to try and avoid criticism, and maybe just praise the other person more. And to support this, I just want to, look at two verses. The first one that says, husbands, love your wife. I had actually referred to that in my earlier, as I explained about, God earlier. And then the second one is 1 Peter 3:2. And this again is to the men out there. Not that I'm not, I'm trying to just direct the men. I'm trying to balance this as well. And of course, using when it comes to what God's word says. But this is for you guys, admire, praise, be devoted to deep love, and enjoy your husband. Sorry, this is for women actually. Adore, admire, praise, be devoted deeply to love, and enjoy your husband. That is 1 Peter 3:2. And the other one was for the husband. So this is, God's expectation that both of us are able. The husband loves the wife as Christ loved the church, and the wife is able to admire the husband and just love them and just, compliment them, So when these two things come and meet, in a room, definitely intimacy will be on other levels. But the reason why we are so resentful to our partners is because half the time they're pointing on us, they are normally bringing us, down in terms of even lowering our self-esteem. They tend not to see good things in us. So that actually interferes with our mentality, it interferes with our emotional health, and it makes us, of course, now not, willing, or sort of like demotivated, to actually enjoy this beautiful thing that God created for us. Now, this is something that I'd really, really like to emphasize. Let us avoid sexual sin. Let us avoid sexual sin. God says 1 + 1, a man, a woman, they come together and they become one. Now, one of the things that I'm dealing in counseling rooms is addiction, and the number one addiction is masturbation. A lot of our young boys, a lot of our young children, and even grown-up men, people in relationships, are sexually gratifying themselves. So most of us are married to gadgets, because those are the things, the objects we are having sex with. Most of us are married to our soaps, which we go and buy from the supermarket, because we are using shortcuts. We want to play God. We are selfish. If you're masturbating, what do you have to give your wife? If you as a wife is masturbating, what do you then have to give your husband? God hates sexual sin. It is one of the things that makes God curse generation. So if you're doing this, please, please, please stop it. Seek help. The curses that we earn go down 3 to 7 generations. So for that 5 minutes of pleasure, you have cast your children, you have cast your children's children, and you've cast your great grandchildren. Is it really worth it? Some of these desires that we have can actually be controlled. It's all about discipline, guys. So let us be more dependent on God. Let us be more dependent on the Holy Spirit. Let us be more dependent, on that superpower and not ourselves. Because if we are slaves to the demands of our bodies, we will end up doing a lot of things. Some of us, of course, masturbation has its own wings. Most of us are normally in porn sites. I once attended a burial ceremony, and it is so crazy. The person who was seated next to me was busy watching porn as some of us were wailing. That is what masturbation addiction does to you. Pornography, it grows in you. You're literally having sex with strangers because these images keep on getting piled up in your mentality. You even want to play out what you see in these videos. Guys, remember, this body is yours and you have to account for it. You sin against your body, it will also rebel against you. So let us take care of our bodies. And this is the last point. Those men who are known to practice adultery, you will have to bear the spiritual consequences of adultery. God hates it when we are caught up in between spiritual husbands and spiritual wives. Okay? As long as you have an extramarital relationship, you have attracted another soul, another spirit into your marital relationship. And this spirit will always be opposing the one that is there, the basic relationship, which is between you and your wife. And that is the reason why some of our relationships are not working. Because during the day, we are busy there running after young men, running after young ladies, and then we come back home and we expect things to work. It cannot work. You already have forces that are working against you. So purity of the body is very, very important. Keep yourself pure for that person that you have legally given your life to. All right? And that's said and done. I will just end up with one thing. If you want something, make time for it and prioritize. So if this video is for you and truly you're in that space where you just feel they are not intimate levels, they are not, you're not enjoying, the intimacy, between you and your partner, just prioritize. As I said earlier, make time for it, assign a day, and you will experience a change. You will start now, enjoying life because you have committed yourself to it. So that's said and done. Again, I'll keep on saying this. I know a lot of our mental health videos don't really go viral because, people just think this stuff is boring. But there's nothing as beautiful as investing in your mindset. So guys, if you're listening to me, you're not subscribed to my channel, please like, share, and subscribe. Let us, push mental health. Let us push mental health awareness, into the society. And definitely when we do, we will create the society that we want with our children, with our, workers, with our employees, with everyone around us, because we have empowered them. As I always said, knowledge is power. As long as you know, you have now choices and no one can ask you anything. So till next time, thank you so much. God bless you.